Hey friend, please subscribe. 1 second for you. Big deal for me.
I was elbow deep in marinade when I felt it, that gut punch sense that something ugly was circling. Name's Craig. I'm 56 now, but this was 5 years ago. I'd left my HVAC business in Toledo to move in with Dad after Mom died. He was turning 70, and I'd spent the last 2 weeks making sure the house felt like home. Smoke from the brisket drifting through the yard, fresh polished photo frames on the coffee table, and a bottle of Glenfarclas waiting in the cabinet. By late afternoon, the house smelled like heaven. Dad was in his recliner, grinning while I adjusted the music volume. Guests filled the kitchen and living room, swapping stories. I tried to shake the tight feeling in my chest, telling myself it was just the usual family tension. The door opened mid-toast. Eric strolled in, 61, smug as hell, with that salesman grin and his wife Carla clinging to his arm like she was the main event. Jen came in right behind them. She hugged Dad but wouldn't meet my eyes, like she'd just done something she wasn't ready to own up to. We got back to the toast. I just raised my glass when Eric stepped forward, tapped his fork against his glass, and flashed that fake smile. "Before we all dig in," he said, "I've got an announcement." I froze. "This house," he went on, "is getting listed Monday. Craig, start packing." For a split second I thought I'd misheard him. Then the clapping started, like half the guests thought it was some kind of joke or a good surprise. Dad blinked, confused, like he'd missed half the conversation. My stomach sank. That feeling I'd had all week? This was it. I didn't wait for explanations. I walked straight through the crowd, ignoring the whispers, and stepped out onto the porch. Cold air hit my face. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sudden clarity that Eric had been planning this for a while. I yanked out my phone and hit Mick's number. He picked up on the second ring. "They've made their move," I said, keeping my voice low but sharp. "Get over here, now." I hung up before he could ask questions, shoved the phone in my pocket, and turned back toward the living room. I didn't even step back inside after calling Mick. I stayed on the porch, gripping the railing, and my mind shot straight back to the call that had started all this. It was 5 years earlier, right after Mom's funeral. Eric rang me one night out of the blue. "Craig, you need to come down," he said. "Dad's not eating. He's forgetting his meds. The place is a wreck." At the time, I was running my HVAC shop in Toledo. Business was steady. I had a nice condo, and Jamie, my girlfriend, was already talking about vacations we hadn't booked yet. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I told Eric I could come for a weekend, maybe a week, just until he's back on his feet, I'd said. I packed a small bag and drove down. The reality slapped me in the face. The kitchen sink was full of dishes that looked weeks old. Dad had unopened mail piled on the counter, pill bottles scattered across the dining table. His fridge was nearly empty except for expired milk and a jar of mustard. He brushed it off. "Just been busy," he mumbled, but his hands shook when he poured coffee, and he winced getting into his chair. That weekend turned into a month. Every time I thought I could leave, something else happened. He'd forget to pay a bill, skip his arthritis meds, or leave the stove on. I realized this wasn't a once-a-week check-in situation. He needed someone here full-time. When I told Eric and Jen, they nodded like they understood. But then they went right back to their lives. They'd show up on holidays, maybe a birthday, with a store-bought pie and a few photos for Facebook. I signed over the business and came back alone. Jamie didn't last long after that. Different priorities. The doctor said it was early-stage dementia. Good days still came. He'd crack jokes about his old construction crew. But there were nights he'd call for Mom, and mornings when his hands just wouldn't cooperate. It wasn't easy. I kept the house running, mowed the lawn, paid the bills, cooked meals, drove him to appointments. I told myself this was what you did for family. Sacrifice came easy when it was for love. But the thing about stepping into someone else's care full time? People start looking at you differently. Eric and Jen would make little comments. "You sure you're okay handling all this?" Jen asked once, her tone syrupy. "Don't you ever get tired of it?" Eric added, like he was planting seeds. I brushed it off. They weren't here. They didn't see the good days, Dad reading the paper with a cup of coffee, or us fixing the old lawnmower together. They didn't see him smile when I made Mom's meatloaf, But somewhere along the way, I caught the shift. Their questions got more pointed. Eric asked about Dad's bank accounts. Jen wanted to know if I had any help lined up, like she was testing my grip. At the time, I thought it was just nosiness. I didn't realize they were building a story where my loyalty made me look controlling, maybe even unstable. One afternoon, I caught Eric watching me from the driveway. He was leaning on his truck, arms crossed, smirk just barely there. He didn't wave. He didn't say a word. Just watched me unload groceries for Dad, like he was measuring something. That image stuck with me, even now, standing on the porch at Dad's party. I'd thought I was protecting him. Turns out I'd been painting a target on my back the whole time. The door opened behind me. Laughter spilled out, Carla's voice riding on top of it. My phone buzzed. Mick's name lit the screen. "I'm 10 minutes out," he said. "Good," I told him. I slipped the phone into my pocket, squared my shoulders, and headed back inside. When I stepped back inside, Carla was in the middle of telling a story loud enough for half the room to hear, hands flying like she was hosting her own show. 2 years earlier, I hadn't even known she existed. Dad met her at the clinic during a routine checkup. She was working the front desk, divorced, no kids, lots of free time, as she put it. They started talking, then dating, and within 3 months, she'd moved in. A courthouse wedding followed weeks later. At first, I was relieved. She cooked without being asked, refilled his pill organizer, and had this constant high-energy presence that seemed to lift him up. She even convinced him to start using a calendar on the fridge to track his appointments. I thought, maybe this is good for him. Maybe she's good for him. It didn't take long for the shine to wear off. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and found her holding one of Mom's framed photos, smirking at it like it was a joke. "This place is like a museum," she said. "All this old junk just sitting here." I told her those old junk photos were family history. She shrugged. "Well, it's wasted space. We could make this room more functional." She started small, switching out coffee mugs, tossing old blankets, but the comments kept coming. If I was in the kitchen, she'd sigh loud enough for me to hear and mutter about too many people in this house. One night, she cornered me while Dad was asleep. "You should think about getting your own place," she said. "It's just best for our marriage if it's the two of us." I laughed, half from disbelief, half from wanting to see if she'd backpedal. She didn't. Eric and Jen couldn't get enough of her. They'd drop by, sing her praises, and leave without asking if Dad needed anything. Carla fed them whatever version of reality she was building, and they ate it up. Suddenly, their lack of involvement looked less like neglect and more like giving Carla space to care for Dad. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Then she started keeping him busy on days I had errands, whisking him out before I got back. Once I came home early and found the house locked, blinds closed, no sign of them. She rolled in an hour later with Dad, acting like it was no big deal. One evening I overheard her on the phone. "No, he's still here," she said, voice low. "I'm working on it." I stepped into the doorway. "Working on what?" She smiled without missing a beat. "Just talking to a friend." I wanted to press her, but Dad was in the next room, and the last thing I wanted was to stress him out. Still, I started paying closer attention. Carla was more guarded than she used to be, taking calls outside, clearing her browser history on the shared laptop, and closing the office door when she went in there. One morning I caught her standing at the dining table with a stack of mail. She slid something into her purse when she saw me. "Just organizing," she said, but her hand was shaking slightly. I started seeing the pattern. Whispered talks, shared laughs that stopped when I walked in. Mick told me to write it all down, so I did. The final shove came a few months later. I was cleaning out an old file cabinet in Dad's office when I found a manila folder shoved behind the drawers. Inside was a printout of emails between Carla and an address I didn't recognize, months before she met Dad. They weren't romantic, but they were detailed. His property value, his accounts, even his medical notes. At the bottom of one, there was a name. Eric. I sat there holding the papers, my hands going cold. Her sudden love for Dad hadn't been an accident. It was planned, and Eric had been in on it before day one. That was the night I stopped hoping things would get better on their own. The next time Carla asked me if I'd thought about moving out, I smiled right back at her. "Not going anywhere," I said. She stared at me for a beat, lips pressed tight, before turning on her heel and heading upstairs. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close, then pulled out my phone. It was time to call Mick again. I didn't have to wait long to see the cracks widen. A week after finding those emails, Dad had a checkup. Carla offered to take him, said it would be good for them to spend time together. I let her go. But halfway through the morning, I realized I'd left my jacket in the kitchen. When I came in, Eric was sitting at the dining table with his laptop open. Carla's was next to it. The second they saw me, they snapped the lids shut and started shuffling papers into a folder. "What's all this?" I asked. "Insurance stuff for Dad," Carla said, smiling too wide. Eric didn't say a word, just gave me that salesman nod and stood up like he was late for something. But I'd seen enough in that half second before they closed the screens. MLS listings, property comps, and a calendar reminder labeled List House. I stepped outside and called Mick. "They're planning something." "I saw house listings." "Document everything," he said again. "Don't confront them yet. You need proof." So I started watching closer. A few days later, I was refilling Dad's pill organizer when I noticed 2 bottles with his name, but different labels than usual. The pills were small, white, and unmarked. I knew his arthritis meds. These weren't them. That night, I stayed up until the pharmacy opened in the morning and called them. The pharmacist confirmed the prescription number wasn't for his meds. It was for a sedative. My stomach flipped. I waited until Carla left for a girls' lunch and checked the bathroom cabinet. One of the new bottles was already half empty. I took photos of the labels, the pill count, everything. Then I locked the bottles in my toolbox in the garage. That afternoon, I drove to the pharmacy in person. The tech printed the records for me. Sure enough, the sedatives had been picked up under Dad's name, but never prescribed by his doctor. When I showed Mick, he didn't even blink. "We're going to need more," he said. "Keep going." So I dug deeper. Dad's phone was usually left on the counter, so one night after he went to bed, I scrolled through it. Most of his texts were from me or Jen, a few from his bowling buddies. But the texts confirmed what I'd already suspected. She and Eric were working together long before the clinic meeting ever happened. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I tested them. Carla was in the kitchen when I came in, phone to her ear. She ended the call quickly, smiling like she'd been caught doing something naughty. "Eric?" I asked. "Nope," she said, moving past me toward the stairs. Her purse was on the counter. As she walked away, I spotted the corner of the same manila folder I'd seen in Dad's office sticking out. I didn't touch it. I wanted her to keep thinking I was blind. Later that week, Dad had another appointment. This time, I offered to take him. Same scene as before. Laptop snapping shut, fake smiles. I didn't need to ask this time. I just called Mick. They were getting bolder. "Then we'll build one stronger," he replied. That night, I set up a small camera in the kitchen, angled toward the table where they always met. I didn't know what I'd catch, but I knew I'd need it. The next day, while Dad napped, Carla went to make his afternoon tea. I watched from the hallway as she opened the pill organizer, palmed 2 white pills from the sedative bottle, and dropped them into his cup before adding the tea bag. The camera caught everything. She carried the tea into the living room and sat with him, chatting like nothing had happened. I stepped back into the shadows, every muscle in my body tight. I didn't stop her. Not yet. I needed Mick to see it. I needed this to be airtight. When she left the room, I slipped into the kitchen, pulled the memory card from the camera, and slid it into my pocket. The smile she gave me when she came back didn't even register. I already had what I needed. By the morning of Dad's birthday, I'd run through every detail twice. The brisket had been smoking since dawn, the playlist was cued, Mom's china was polished and laid out like it was Thanksgiving. If they were going to make a move today, I wanted it to be against the backdrop of me doing everything right. Guests started rolling in mid-afternoon. Dad was in a fresh shirt, hair combed back, grinning at everyone. I kept the music low and the drinks moving. Eric showed up without his kids, which was weird. He usually paraded them around like trophies. Jen came in a few minutes later, quiet, almost too careful, like she was walking on glass. And then there was Carla, buzzing around the kitchen, laughing too loud, clinking glasses, acting like she was queen of the damn house. Half an hour in, A tall guy in a sport coat came through the door. Carla hugged him like an old friend. "Craig, this is Frank," she said. "He's a family friend." Frank shook my hand. Firm grip, polished watch. Realtor smile. I didn't need a name tag to know what he was here for. I played along. "Nice to meet you." Then I excused myself to check the brisket. When I came back inside, Dad was in his recliner, surrounded by people, and Eric was standing near the fireplace with a wine glass in one hand. He tapped it with a fork, the room going quiet. "I want to thank everyone for being here to celebrate Dad," Eric started. He gave a speech about family and moving forward, his salesman voice smooth as oil. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a stack of papers. "And moving forward is exactly what we're doing. As of today, I have power of attorney for Dad's affairs. On Monday, this house will be listed, and we'll be transitioning Dad to a care facility." The words hit me like a slap. Then he turned, smiling right at me. "Craig, you're out!" Half the room clapped, some because they thought it was a good thing, others because they didn't know any better. Dad blinked, looking around like he'd lost his place in the conversation. "What about our trip to Branson?" he asked. Eric didn't even acknowledge it. My chest burned, but I kept my face blank. This was their move. Now it was my turn. I set my glass down and walked straight past them, out the front door. The cold air steadied me. I pulled out my phone and hit Mick's number. "It's happening," I said when he picked up. "Bring Walter and the doctor." "We're doing this now." "You sure?" "Dead sure." I hung up and went back inside, weaving through the crowd like nothing had happened. Carla was pouring champagne, chattering to Frank about market timing and curb appeal. I caught Frank looking at the photos on the wall like he was already picturing the listing. I stayed in the background, letting them think I was sulking. Really, I was timing it. Mick would need about 15 minutes to get here, maybe less if traffic was light. Eric kept working the room, papers in hand, leaning in close to relatives, pointing toward the dining room like he was already giving tours. Carla kept refilling glasses, leaning down to whisper in Dad's ear. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I caught Jen off to the side, fiddling with her bracelet. She wouldn't look at me. The smell of the brisket filled the house, but no one was eating. The party had shifted. There was this undercurrent of tension now, everyone picking sides without saying it out loud. When the knock came at the door, I moved fast. I was the one to answer it. Mick stepped in first, calm as ever, followed by Uncle Walt, tall, quiet, eyes sharp, and Dr. Kwan with his black bag in hand. "Afternoon," Mick said, smiling like he was here for dessert. Behind me, the chatter died. Eric's face twitched, just for a second. Carla's hand tightened around her glass. I didn't announce anything. I just stepped aside and let them in. Mick walked in like he'd been invited. Uncle Walt followed, calm, steady, and Dr. Kwan shut the door behind him. Every eye in the room was on us. "Craig," Mick said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Mind if we take a few minutes of everyone's time?" Eric chuckled, shaking his head. "What is this? A legal intervention?" "Something like that," Mick said. He set his briefcase on the coffee table and flipped it open. "First, quick clarification. Mr. Dawson," he looked at Dad, "you already have a power of attorney. It's me." The room went still. "That's a lie," Eric snapped. Mick didn't even blink. He pulled out a signed document. "Dated 3 weeks ago, notarized and filed. Witnesses present. So whatever you're waving around, Eric, it's worthless." Dad looked from Mick to Eric. "I thought you were just helping with bills." Eric's jaw worked, but he stayed quiet. Mick kept going. "Second matter, Carla." Her smile froze. "What about me?" I grabbed the remote from the mantel and clicked the TV on. The footage played, clear as day. Carla, dropping 2 small white pills into Dad's tea and stirring like she was making lemonade. Gasps rippled through the room. Dad's brow furrowed. What is that?" "Your kitchen. Last Tuesday," I said. Mick set a folder beside the remote. "Pharmacy records. Those pills weren't prescribed to you. They're sedatives, picked up under your name but without your doctor's order." Carla's face went red. "You're twisting—" "No," Dr. Kwan said, stepping forward. "I confirmed it myself. I have new test orders here to make sure your father hasn't been harmed long-term. Dad stared at her, his voice shaking. Did you drug me? Carla's lips pressed into a hard line. She didn't answer. Mick pulled out another folder. And finally, the coordination. Text messages between you two. He glanced at Eric. Long before you met at the clinic, discussing Mr. Dawson's finances, his property, and how to ensure Craig wouldn't be living here. Jen's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Eric stepped toward Mick. You can't just... Sit down, Uncle Walt said, voice low but sharp. Eric stopped mid-step. Frank, the so-called family friend, muttered something about not getting involved, and made for the door. No one stopped him. Carla's bubbly act was gone. She was pacing now, muttering under her breath. When she caught me watching her, she snapped, Enjoy your little victory. It won't last. Dad's voice rose. You were supposed to help me. She didn't look at him. Jen started crying. I thought you two cared about him. I thought... She stopped herself, shaking her head. Mick closed his briefcase. This is how it's going to go. Mr. Dawson will stay in his home. Carla, you'll have no access to his medications. Eric, you'll return any funds you've withdrawn in the last 6 months, or we'll proceed with charges. In fact, he turned to me. You've got those bank statements handy? I handed them over. Eric's smirk was gone. He was pale now, eyes darting to Carla like she might save him. She didn't. Dr. Kwan sat beside Dad. We'll run a quick check tonight, but I want you in the clinic tomorrow morning. Dad nodded slowly, still looking at Carla like he didn't recognize her. I clicked the TV off. The silence was heavier than any shouting match could have been. Eric shoved his papers into his jacket. You'll regret this. No, I said. You will. Carla grabbed her purse and headed for the stairs. I'm not doing this in front of all these people. You already did, Mick said. She froze for half a beat, then kept walking. Jen wiped her eyes. Dad, I'm so sorry. He didn't answer her right away. Instead, he looked at me. Craig, get these people out of my house. I nodded, moving toward the door. Carla's heels pounded the stairs like gunshots. I have wasted 2 years of my life on this circus, she yelled from the landing. A door slammed upstairs hard enough to rattle the picture frames. Eric stayed planted in the middle of the living room, palms out like he was the reasonable one. Look, everybody's overreacting. We can work something out. Yeah, Mick cut in. Let's work out where the $50,000 went. Eric's head jerked. What? Mick flipped open another folder and laid down a stack of bank statements. Withdrawals over 6 months. Labeled as financial services. Every penny came out of your father's account and landed in yours. Eric tried to laugh. That's repayment for expenses. Gas, travel. Gas doesn't cost 50 grand, I said. Jen stepped forward slowly, eyes locked on Eric. Wait, you told me Dad wanted to move, that he'd asked you to handle it. He didn't look at her. I might have simplified things, so you'd understand. Her voice shook. You lied to me. Dad's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. Get out of my house, he said, his voice low but steady. Eric smirked like it was a bluff. You can't just throw me out. I'll get a court order. No, Mick said, snapping the folder shut. What you're going to get is a criminal investigation. We've got financial exploitation, fraud, and enough evidence to put a restraining order in place by morning. Dad pointed toward the door. Now, Eric's smile finally cracked. You're making a mistake. Biggest mistake, I said, was underestimating me. Upstairs, drawers slammed open and shut. Carla's voice was a constant stream of curses. Jen wiped her face and turned to Dad. I'm sorry. I should have been here more. I believed them. He gave her a tired look. Believing's not the problem. Staying blind is. Eric pulled out his phone, muttering about calling his lawyer. Mick just grinned. Great. We'll have them meet the prosecutor. A minute later, Carla appeared at the top of the stairs, lugging 2 suitcases. Her face was blotchy, hair falling out of its perfect curl. She clomped down each step like the house itself had betrayed her. "I'll get my lawyer," she spat. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Sure we do," Mick said. "A woman on the wrong end of a felony case. Bring whoever you want." She stopped halfway to the door, glaring at me. "You think you've won because you caught a few things on camera? This isn't over." I opened the door. "It is for you." She brushed past me, the scent of her perfume sharp in the cold air. Eric followed, still scrolling on his phone, muttering under his breath. Mick stood in the doorway watching them go. "I'll have paperwork drawn up tonight," he said. "Restraining orders. Change the locks tomorrow." Uncle Walt gave my shoulder a squeeze. "Good job, kid." The front door clicked shut behind them. For the first time all day, the room felt like it could breathe again. The front door had barely shut before Mick was pulling out his phone, already lining up the next steps. "I'll email you the restraining order paperwork tonight," he said. "Locks get changed tomorrow morning. Don't wait." That night felt like the first real quiet in months. No pacing upstairs, no fake laughter floating down the hall. Just Dad watching the news while Uncle Walt and I shared a beer in the kitchen. Within a week, Carla folded. Her lawyer called Mick, floated some story about misunderstandings and family disagreements, but we all knew where it was heading. She took a plea, probation, community service, no contact with Dad for 3 years. Eric wasn't so lucky. The DA wanted to make an example out of him. Felony financial exploitation, fraud, and theft. He lost his job before the arraignment. Never called, never showed up at the house again. Jen changed after that night. She started stopping by on Saturdays, sometimes with casseroles, sometimes with just groceries and coffee. She'd sit with Dad while I ran errands, ask him about old hunting trips or Mom's recipes. I could still see the guilt in her eyes, but she kept showing up. That mattered more than any apology. Uncle Walt got his own good news. His last round of tests came back clean. He beat the cancer, sold his place 2 hours away and bought a small ranch 15 minutes from us. Now he's over twice a week, tinkering with the mower or just hanging out with Dad on the porch. And Dad, he's better. Not perfect. Dementia doesn't work that way. But the confusion isn't as heavy now. There are more days when he's sharp enough to read the paper, talk about the weather, or remember the names of his old crew from the construction company. I hired a caregiver, Denise, for the mornings. She helps him with breakfast, meds, and a short walk if the weather's good. That freed me up to take on a few HVAC jobs again. Being back in the truck, tools in hand, felt like getting a piece of myself back. The house feels safe now. No one lurking in the kitchen with hidden agendas. No whispers about selling the place. Just a steady rhythm. Coffee in the morning. Dad's favorite game shows in the evening. The smell of brisket or chili drifting through the rooms. One afternoon, Jen showed up with fried chicken and mashed potatoes. We ate at the kitchen table, Dad telling stories about the first house he and Mom bought. She laughed, shook her head, and said, "I don't know how you do it, Craig." "Same way you make dinner," I said. One step at a time. That night, after Jen left, I sat on the porch with Dad. Fireflies blinked in the yard. He looked out toward the street and said, "You know, it's nice to just be home." I didn't answer right away. I just handed him his beer and let him have that moment. A few weeks later, Dad and I packed up the truck and finally made that Branson trip we'd talked about for years. It was just the two of us. No schedule, no one waiting back home to pull something shady while we were gone. We drove straight to the lake first thing. The water was calm, stretching out like glass under the morning sun. Dad stood at the edge, hands in his jacket pockets, and for a long minute, he didn't say anything. "This is where your mom used to fish," he finally said. "Could sit here all day just watching the bobber." I'd heard a lot of his stories over the years, but that day, he started telling ones I'd never heard. About the time Mom hooked a catfish so big it snapped the line, about how they'd come out here after fights just to sit in the quiet until they could talk again. He looked at me then, eyes clearer than they'd been in a long time. "I'm proud of you." I shifted on my feet. "You don't have to." "I do," he said, cutting me off. "Your mom would have called you stubborn, but also her hero." That one hit hard. I didn't need the praise, but I needed the truth. We could have lost everything if I hadn't acted, if I'd just let them run their play. We stayed out there until the sun dipped low, skipping rocks and watching boats drift past. When we headed back into town, Dad bought dinner at a little diner like he'd just gotten his first paycheck. On the drive home the next day, I thought about how family works, or doesn't. Blood doesn't mean loyalty. Sometimes it's the ones with your last name who aim straight for your back, but you still fight for what's right. I've forgiven Jen. She earned it by showing up when it counted. Eric? Maybe one day. Carla's gone for good, and I don't waste time wondering what she's doing now. The house is still filled with Mom's recipes, her old photo albums, and the tools Dad and I use to fix things that don't even need fixing. Some nights we make her meatloaf, other nights just burgers on the grill, and every night without fail, Dad and I sit on the porch with a beer. We watch the street go quiet, the sun fade, and the world settle down. I used to think justice was the win, but standing here now I know better. The real win was keeping what mattered safe.
YouTube picked this for you. Tap it. Let's see if they guessed right.